Are we having fun yet? I have a feeling you are. How could you not? This is pretty exciting stuff to play with, even though we're just barely scratching the surface. I know that once we start to see our assets in a 3D space like this, it really kind of gets exciting. Today, talking about cameras in this 3D space in After Effects. This should bring some dynamic movement to our work beyond just what we could do with moving layers in 3D space. So in this exercise project, I have comp number 1, which is the real basic stage. It has a floor that I built in 3D space. And then sitting on that floor are these 3 layers, 1, 2, and 3. And we'll just kind of gradually get used to how we can move through space with a camera and understand some of the camera properties. One thing I would like to make note of is that I ensured myself that I was actually positioning these layers on the floor by changing my view from active camera to front. And you can see the floor is this blue line that runs across the bottom, and that each of these layers is actually in contact with it. The other way to do it would be to look at your active camera and take one of your layers. I'll take the 1, open up position, and just move it until it disappears. It just goes through the floor, which is also something you should just be aware of, because that might be kind of cool for a project down the road. So you just kind of go up and down until it just barely sits there and is not being eaten up by the floor. So cameras. Camera is a layer that's found in the layer menu. Boom. Camera settings pops up into view. Camera settings has a lot of stuff, and we're not going to go over it all. That gets a little more advanced. We can do a lot with just some basic information here. So this first camera, I'm going to check out the presets here. And we're going to choose a 50 millimeter camera. And we can even call that 50 mm for the name of the camera, just in case we want to look at some different lenses. And all this is talking about is a different lens on the camera. And the 50 millimeter is the default camera. So yeah, film size, zoom, angle of view, all this stuff is affected by the preset that we choose, focal length and whatnot. There are some other options of enable depth of field, locking to zoom, what units we're using, blah, 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 but I'm not going to worry about that just yet. Once I hit OK and I get out of that window, I now have a layer that is a camera, my 50 millimeter lens. And if you notice, nothing changes. Did you notice that nothing changed? You probably didn't, because you weren't expecting it to. That is because the default camera in After Effects, before you put one in, the so-called active camera, is a 50 millimeter camera. So it should just look the exact same as what we saw before. So when you're in active camera and the layer of the camera is selected, you don't see it anywhere. You don't know really where the camera is, because the camera produces this frame. This frame is produced by the lens of this camera. So we're basically sitting behind the camera right now. We're like in the cameraman's seat. If I open up the options for the layer of the camera, I have the transform properties of point of interest, position, orientation, and rotation. So there is no scale, there's no opacity. Those properties do not apply to a camera layer. And then we have camera options, and here we have our zoom, depth of field, which is off, focus distance, aperture, and blur level. So all of these have values to them, which can be keyframed, except for depth of field. That's either an on or off thing. How do we see the camera? You're not going to see it until we actually go to a different view. And I could say right now, let's go to the right view. And we look at it from the right. I'll have to zoom out a little bit. But here is the stage, so my floor, the blue line just runs back into space. This is Z right there. That's the depth of our stage. And then these flat little lines here are the layers 1, 2, and 3. This guy is the camera. And the camera is visible by a box. So you have to think of like the camera being a unit, a box. And then its lens has a certain throw, a view angle, and that's what these lines are. And then this line right here is the focus point. And right now everything's going to be in focus because we don't have depth of field enabled, which would change that, and then we can change where our focus lies. So the camera itself has the same properties that you would see on a normal layer. It has a green arrow for Y, a red arrow for X, and a blue arrow for Z. And those are the position properties that you can move the camera around in space. The other thing that's here is a point of interest, and it's hard to tell, but there's a little circle right here, and you can grab it and you can drag it, and notice that I can also make it longer or shorter, but what it's really hoping to see or base itself on is just this angle. And right now, since I'm at the right view, I am rotating my camera's X value. Okay, but that's the point of interest, and we're going to talk about that in a second. I think it's best to look at cameras in a multi-window view. So instead of the right view, let's go back to active camera. We can change this from one view to 2 views, or even 4 views. You can go crazy and do 4. 4 is great if you have enough screen space, otherwise windows get a little small. So 2 views horizontal will give me this product, which is really fantastic. Here I have a top view. You can see my camera. I'm looking down on the stage. Here's my stage. There's the 1, the 2, and then the 3. And then here's my active camera. So again, there's the box that is the camera. Here's my point of interest. So this box here, if I grab an arrow, like an X arrow, and start dragging it, you can see the results in the active camera view. So I'm kind of panning to the right, now I'm panning to the left, and you get the sense of depth because there's that relationship of these layers. It's called parallaxing in their depth. I could take my Z and I could move us in toward these layers and sort of fly through it. And then I can also access my Y value, or I could go down. Eventually I'll end up like right at the level of the floor, or I could rise up above them. But every time I make one of these moves, I'm going to open that transform area up and just reset. Every time I make one of those moves using my arrows in one of these viewports, I would like to make notice that the point of interest moves with it. So let's look at point of interest and position as I start to drag it on the X value. So I'm gaining some numbers there as I climb through that X-axis. If I were to change my Z, I'm going back in space. You can see that I am gaining value in my Z. So when you use the arrows, you automatically change your point of interest. Point of interest really becomes kind of a monster if we don't pay close attention to the relationship of it and a camera. So what is the point of interest? Really, the point of interest is a place where we could essentially lock down our well, the most interesting point of our stage, whatever, that we want to make sure the camera's always looking at. And you can do this by just leaving it where it is, or even putting it to a specific layer. So I'm going to take that point of interest and I'm going to plant it right in the center of that first layer I can see here, which is the 1. And now the camera has panned over to the left and we're looking at the 1. The 1 is basically in the center of our screen. Now, without using the arrows themselves, but getting that little box, you basically hover your mouse right over that box and you just make sure that it doesn't say X, Y, or Z. I can move my camera and it will always be looking at that layer or whatever it is that you have put that point of interest in. I do think that I should lower my camera a little bit on the Y. So I'm going to take the Y, I'm just going to lower it so I can keep this stuff in view. I have some rendering going on in the background, so my update is a little chuggy. I could ultimately change that by lowering my resolution to like 1/3. That should help. This one too, it's the same. Okay, so that camera move with using the Y arrow took my point of view down with me, but it's still located in that same spot. So now as I drag, well, it's still a little chuggy, isn't it? Time for a new computer. Happens every couple years. So I can start to bring my camera around and pivot along the right side of this thing, and I can get behind it. But notice I'm just moving the camera, and the point of interest stays the same. That is pretty cool if you're trying to specifically target a spot. But now what if I want to animate my camera through the space? I'd have to manage both my point of interest and the position in their keyframes. So if I wanted to do something like that, move the camera through the space but not have it locked down onto that one layer, I'd have to start keyframing both point of interest and position, so that maybe in 2 seconds, as my camera moves forward over here, maybe I'll also have it pivot to the side of the 1. I want to just cruise right next to it. Uh-oh, what did I just do? I just moved my Y. Come here, just a little bit over. Yeah, like right there. So that's 2 seconds, and then maybe by 4 seconds, I will continue forward. Pass by the 2, and I'll just kind of land on the 3. So this movement now is basically a choreographed push with the camera, but I'm not just managing position. I have to make sure that I'm keyframing also the point of interest, and I was able to do that in unison by doing moves with the arrows. Now if I did that without doing the arrows, which I will just nix those and then open them back up again, but I want to, okay, I am where I was, okay. So by 2 seconds, if I say, yeah, I want the camera to be like swooping by the 1 and kind of looking back at the 3, and I just grab the box of the camera and start moving it, see what happens is the camera is still considering that point of interest to be its anchor. So I'd have to grab that point of interest and then like move it, maybe toward somewhere over here at this point, and then by 4 seconds, if I take the camera again and I advance it, happened? Get it. There we go. And I advance it forward. I need to make sure that I also advance my point of interest forward. And now I have two paths, just like I did last time, but I had to do it manually because you wouldn't want to have it flip around backwards and all of a sudden you're looking into what used to be the space behind us. That would just be very strange. So very basic introduction on this movie of a camera and some basic movements. In our next movie, we'll explore other cameras and get a little more advanced in how we can handle moving through that space. Okay.